In my book, there are few things better than freshly baked bread. So today, we're making simple, soft, homemade white bread. And even if you're intimidated by the prospect of making yeasted bread at home, I promise this recipe is one that you can master. Let's get baking. There's not too much to this one in terms of ingredients. We have bread flour, 500 grams or about 4 1/4 cups, to which we're going to add a tablespoon of sugar. There we go. A tablespoon of instant yeast. You can use less. You can also use regular yeast. It's okay. The difference is really just in terms of how quickly your bread is going to rise. So you can give it a slower rise. It'll develop more flavor with less yeast or with just regular standard yeast. All right, we are going to put in a teaspoon of salt. I use kosher salt. It would be slightly saltier if I use table salt, that would be fine too. And we have 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. That works out to about 25 grams, and we're just gonna plunk that in as well. All right, so we will stir all of that. In fact, you can do this without a stand mixer. You can do it with a stand mixer, which is of course what I'm going to do here. Ta-da! I will go ahead and stir those dry ingredients in a little bit. The sugar and the yeast kind of on one side and then the salt on the other side. Some folks like to avoid having the salt and the yeast touch each other. It's all going to get mixed together so quickly. It doesn't really matter a whole lot. All right, so we will go ahead and get that mixed together with our one other ingredient, which will be some warm water. So let me grab that back in a flash. All right, we have 300 milliliters of warm water, and I'm going to start the mixer. We're going to run this with a paddle attachment and pour the water in, so kind of let everything distribute and then pour the water in gradually. And we're just going to mix this until it comes together in a really rough, shaggy dough, and then we'll be letting it rest for a few minutes. There we go. And there we go. I will mention that that butter was softened to room temperature, or let come up to room temperature. Butter that is cold from the refrigerator will obviously not mix in real well. All right, so we are going to just let this stand uncovered for about 10 minutes, just to let the ingredients kind of sit for a minute, and the gluten will start to form, the flour, and will get hydrated, and that will make for much easier kneading. Right, back in 10 minutes. It's been 10 minutes. Our dough looks pretty much just like it did 10 minutes ago. Rough, shaggy dough, but we'll smooth that out by kneading it, and those 10 minutes really are helpful just to let the gluten relax and make the kneading process a little bit more efficient. I'm using my stand mixer. We're going to knead for between 5 and 8 minutes, stopping as needed to kind of claw the dough back off of the dough hook. And if it's sticking to the sides too much, we can sprinkle just a little bit of flour, but we don't want too much. You can absolutely do this by hand, initially stirring the ingredients together, mixing with a wooden spoon, and then of course kneading by hand. If you knead by hand, you're going to want to knead for 8 to 10 minutes or so. Again, adding just as much flour as you need to keep the dough from sticking. All right, here we go. All right, It has been altogether about 6 minutes. You can see that the dough has climbed the dough hook, and I can just kind of pry it off in one big stretchy cohesive ball of dough. It's also done what we call cleaning the sides of the bowl, meaning it's picked up any extra bits along the edge. It's nice and elastic, not sticky. And I'll take that in my hands and just kind of show you how that looks. All right, so there it is. It's nice and soft and stretchy, and people sometimes will test their dough. We want this to be elastic enough to pass what's called the windowpane test. So if I take a little bit of dough, I might have taken too small of a piece. Let me take a slightly bigger piece here. All right, and can I stretch it thin enough to be able to see light through it? And you can take my word for it, we can do that. I don't know if you can kind of tell, but we can stretch that thin enough to see light through it, and that is dough that passes the windowpane test. If you can't get it thin enough to be translucent without it breaking, then it just needs to be kneaded a little bit more so that that gluten develops and becomes stretchier. All right, so I'm going to take this dough, form it into a ball, all right, just so that there aren't real lumpy edges. We'll kind of tuck those underneath. I'm gonna set it right back in this bowl. We're not even gonna grease that bowl. We are just going to cover it and let the dough sit at room temperature or slightly warm room temperature for an hour to an hour and a half until it is about doubled in size. You can go as far as like measuring its volume. Some folks put it in kind of a straight sided container so that they can see it grow by height. I just eyeball it. It's been just over an hour. Our dough has easily doubled in size, and you can see here along the side of the bowl, we can see some of the little air bubbles as the yeast has caused this dough to rise. All right, we are going to, as gently as we can, get this dough out of the bowl. It really doesn't stick at all. We didn't even need to oil it, and we didn't, right? And we're just going to nudge that onto a baking sheet. And at this point, I've got my baking sheet lined with a silicone liner. You can do just parchment paper. You can even just lightly grease it. That would be fine too. And at this point, we're going to form it into a loaf. This is going to be made into, into 2 loaves of bread. I like to do it that way because my family will eat one with a meal tonight, and then the other one will keep better if it's bread always keeps better if it's unsliced, all right, unless it's got lots of preservatives and such. So you can absolutely just form it into one loaf. You saw me do that just there with my hands, all right, and just kind of tuck the ends under and smooth the top. But I'm going to go ahead and take my bench scraper here and cut this in half. We don't need to be super precise as long as it's close enough to even. That way our baking time will be the same for both. All right, so we're going to take each one of these, all right, about the same, I think. Maybe I'll just take a little bit of that one. All right, and we are going to just kind of gently stretch that. You can kind of see here. All right, gently stretch that so that the top is smooth. And we're going to make it sort of into a football shape here. Pinch the ends underneath. All right, and just kind of make that surface a little bit taut. All right, we'll set this one here. You can shape that to be round. You can shape it in this oblong shape like I'm doing. Either way is fine. Okay, I'm going to do that with the second one as well. Or you can see from this end kind of what I'm doing with my hands. All right. go. That's really all there is to it. We're going to let these rise. Again, the time for this rise will depend, like the first one, on how warm the space is. If you want them to rise more quickly, put them somewhere a little bit warmer. If you want to slow walk that rise, you can put these in a cooler space, or again, even in the refrigerator, and let those rise much more slowly. You do want to cover them. I will say at room temperature, or relatively warm room temperature, these are only going to take 45 minutes to rise. Our loaves have risen. You get those from a few angles there. There is one more step I'm going to take. So there are a couple ways you could finish these off. You could leave them just as they are. You could sprinkle them with flour for a white mountain bread finish. You could carefully give them a few slashes with a very, very sharp knife, or even a razor blade, okay? Or you can do what I'm going to do, which is to brush the loaves with a little bit of melted butter. And this is, of course, going to be tasty. We'll be buttering our fresh sliced bread anyhow. But it also keeps the crust soft, so it is not doughy soft. It's still definitely bread crust, but it's kind of a softer crust. So it's something that we like, and definitely you can play around with that and figure out what you prefer in terms of finishing off your bread. And it was maybe, oh gosh, a teaspoon, half a tablespoon of butter or so at the most, just melted and brushed on. Don't have to be too perfect about it. Just don't push down too hard, because you'll deflate your bread a bit. All right, there we go. They are ready for the oven. They're going to go in at 450 degrees for 8 minutes. Then we'll, without opening the oven, turn the heat down to 425 and give them another 14 minutes. If you're baking one large loaf, you'll need to give them a little bit more time. Full instructions and, of course, the measurements and ingredients are in the description below. Our bread is out of the oven. It took exactly the 22 total minutes that we expected. I've got this pretty dialed in, but if you aren't quite sure, oven temperatures vary, humidity levels, all that stuff, you can always test your bread by tapping. I'm going to do this gently here. So tapping its underside and see if it sounds hollow. All right, and if your bread sounds hollow, then that's a good indication, along with color, of course, that it is done. So we are going to do the hardest thing we have to do in this whole process, which is to let these cool completely before we slice into the bread. You can slice into warm bread. It's delicious. It's great. You know what? If you're going to eat it all at once, great. Slice into it warm, not hot. But you do, it kind of steams as it, as you slice into it, and it eventually it loses some moisture. If you're not going to eat the whole loaf at once, definitely hold off until it's cool if you possibly can. But also definitely eat this fresh. All right, so we will patiently wait, and then we will slice into one of these. The wait is finally over. It is time to slice into a loaf of bread. Give the camera a good look at that. We have a nice, fairly tight crumb, no big holes like you'd find in sourdough, but nothing too dense either. So there's only one thing left to do here, and that is to apply some Kerrygold. So Kerrygold on this first slice. Take a bite. Perfect. That's it. Nothing too difficult, hopefully, and certainly we hope you try this out for yourself, and whatever you do, check back again next Friday at 4 o'clock for a new video.